You're about to hear one of the most disturbing true stories on the internet. In 1921, a German farmer woke up to find a deep set of footprints leading from the forest right up to his back door. Whoever has come to his house had not left yet. After making sure it wasn't just his family, he searched everywhere on his property and his house everywhere, but he could not determine who made the prints or where they went. A few weeks later, his maid abruptly quits, saying every time she's alone in the house, she hears demonic voices in the attic. Shortly thereafter, he and his family start to hear the voices too. When no one's heard from them in a couple of days, the neighbors go over to check and they find them in the barn. One by one, each of the family members made their way down to the barn where they were systematically murdered and stacked in a corner. To this day, no one knows who or what is responsible for this crime. Ever wonder what would happen if you stopped sleeping? During World War II, the Russians wanted to find a way to keep their soldiers awake longer, so they came up with this awful experiment where they took prisoners of war, put them in the gas chamber, and exposed them to experimental drugs to see how long they could keep them awake for. Initially, the drugs seemed great. The first 4 days, the subjects were agitated, but were normal. By day 5, they stopped interacting with each other and began acting extremely paranoid. On day 9, one of the subjects screamed for so long that he tore his vocal cord. On day 14, they started eating themselves. When they turned off the gas on day 15, all of the subjects began screaming in pain, begging for them to turn the gas back on. When they didn't, they fell asleep and died. If you scare easily, swipe on. In 1989, a woman started hearing strange banging sounds in her walls and in the ceiling. Then one night, her crawl space to her attic was open, so she went to go have a look. When she's just feet away, an old man suddenly appears in the crawl space and looks her dead in the eye before vanishing. There was nobody else in the house. Worried no one's gonna take her seriously over apparent ghosts in her house, she ends up calling a paranormal investigator. Paranormal crew arrived. They were actually very skeptical until they heard loud banging in the attic. Then they decided to go up and have a look. As soon as the two men get up into the attic, one of them screams and suddenly disappears. The other, who didn't have a flashlight, starts using the flash in his camera to illuminate the attic. And he takes one of the most famous pictures in paranormal history. His partner, who was in total shock, had been lifted off the ground and tied to one of the beams. That was the last time the woman ever stayed in the house. However, it's still being rented out today, but nobody ever lasts longer than 1 or 2 months. Did you know there was a real ghost ship? On 1872, the Mary Celeste set sail from Staten Island, New York to Genoa, Italy. The Mary Celeste was a brigantine, boarding a 7-man crew, a captain, his wife, and 2 kids. 28 days later, on December 5th, a Canadian ship, Dei Gratia, found the Mary Celeste off the coast of Azores Island. Seemingly abandoned with one of its lifeboats missing, the ship was searched. There was 6 months of food and cargo was intact, but none of its crews were anywhere on the ship. Other than the ship being slightly disleveled, the Mary Celeste was still seaworthy. No reason for its abandonment made much sense. Till this day, it remains a mystery of what happened to the Mary Celeste. This man sacrificed himself to save his camera. In 1980, a man named Robert Landsberg, who lived in Portland, Oregon, was photographically documenting a changing volcano known as Mount St. Helen. The local authorities decided to evacuate the area, and everybody cooperated other than a few hardcore individuals. On the morning of May 18, Robert was a few miles away from the volcano's summit, when all of a sudden the volcano finally erupted. Robert, seeing the magma coming towards him, he knew his fate was sealed, so he decided to capture the moment and then find a way to save the camera. Robert sorts the camera in his backpack and holds it against his chest, and then lays on top of it in last measures to save the camera. 17 days later, they find Robert Landsberg's body, and surely enough, he was able to save the camera. Here are the pictures he took before he was killed by the volcano. This is how you know you're dating a psychopath. In September 2006, a 26-year-old woman, Jodi Arias, met a 29-year-old man, Travis Alexander, in a big business convention in Las Vegas. They seemed like the perfect couple until Travis's friends began noticing something strange from Jodi. Jodi was extremely obsessed with Travis, so much that she would sneak into his house through the doggy door, hide, and listen to his conversations. His friends, worried for his safety, suggested he should cut ties with this girl. As they spoke to him, they hear something outside the door. Travis goes and opens the door, and Jodi was there. She didn't say a word. She gave him a death stare and stormed off. 2 months later, Travis missed an important meeting. His friends weren't able to get a hold of him either, so they scheduled a welfare check. The police found Travis inside his bathroom dead. Jodi was immediately suspected for his murder. Shortly, the police finds a camera inside the washing machine, and they were able to extract the pictures. The pictures are of Jodi making her way to the bathroom and taking this picture before stabbing Travis multiple times to death. If you want to live, do not take this medicine. In the early 1900s, Eben Beyer was a man born in a wealthy family. One day, Eben was on his way home in a train, and since it was going to be a long ride, he decided to take a nap on the top bunk bed that they had available. While Evans was sleeping, he rolled off the top bunk bed and landed on his shoulder, injuring his left arm. As soon as he got home, he decided to visit his physical therapist. The therapist examined his shoulder and determined there was no structural damage. He tells him there's this product that came online. It's quite expensive, but since you're a man of means, it might be something you would consider. It's called Raditor. It's supposed to dull aches and pains and give you a huge boost in energy. Evan was excited and said, let's do it. He went home and took a small spoonful of this liquid, and right away he felt this huge surge of energy and the pain faded away. Evan started taking 3 full bottles every single day. For years he did this. It was all going great. Until his jaw fell off. Literally, in 1931, one day his lower jaw separated from his skull and went slack. The reason why this happened is because Raditor is just radioactive water. This is why you should always sleep with your lights on. In 1991, a man named Christopher Case was found dead in his bathtub, fully clothed in the fetal position. When police interviewed his best friend Sammy, she told them about a very disturbing phone call she got from him the night before he died. On the call, he told her that on the previous night he had been woken up to what sounded like whispering coming from underneath his bed. When he turned to look, he couldn't move. As he laid helplessly, he watched a black figure pull itself out from underneath his bed. Once it was fully upright, it reached down and began choking him until he passed out. The next morning when it came to, he felt his neck and it was swollen and bruised. Then he saw there was blood on his hands and he saw there were deep uniform incisions on each of his fingertips. As he's saying all this to Sammy and telling her how scared he is to go to bed that night, he suddenly stops and says, I hear whispering outside my room. And then the phone went dead. This is why you never go to the faraway dock. In 1994, an 11-year-old boy named Mark arrived at summer camp and made his way over to the dining hall where the director was going to talk about the next couple of weeks. The director emphasized no one was allowed to swim out to that dock located in the middle of the lake, but she didn't say why. Mark and his 3 friends were so excited about this faraway dock that when everybody was eating, they jumped on the lake and started swimming over there. When they finally got to the dock, there was no surprise to them. It just looked like any other dock. They try to make the best of it, so they climb on top and play the game where they all stand on one side until it floods. Last one to fall off wins. As the corner sank, they start hearing a scratching sound coming from underneath the dock. Suddenly, hundreds of these big meaty spiders start crawling out through the breaks of the wood and slide down the slanted dock towards the boys. The boys freak out, they fall forward, they got spiders all over their face and hair. Turns out the dock was off limits because it was overrun with dock spiders and the boys flooded their nest. Sometimes reality is stranger than fiction. A couple renting in the woods wanted a relaxing vacation. The first 3 nights they relaxed and enjoyed each other's company. Later that night, the husband is woken up by the sound of banging on the front door. He goes down and asks who it is, and the banging sound stops. On the next day, he decides to tell the wife what happened, and she wants to leave. They ran towards their car and tried to turn it on, but nothing happened. Unable to call anyone and miles away from help, they decided to wait it out. On the 9th night, it knocked on their bedroom door. When he opened the door, he saw this tall, pitch-black figure just watching him 10 feet down the stair. Panicked, he stumbles down into the room and closes the door. The tall man opened the door. As the husband was getting ready to strike him with the axe, the tall man began screeching like something never heard before. The husband manages to strike him multiple times in the chest, although, before getting knocked down by the tall man unconscious. The last thing he remembers is the screams of his wife. He wakes up the next day and can't find his wife anywhere. The husband couldn't bear the loss, so he hung himself in the forest. Weeks later, his wife's body was found in the furnace with multiple axe wounds in the shaft. Whatever you do, stay away from this hotel. On January 28, 2013, Canadian college student Elisa Lam checked in at the Cecil Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. Her stay was to last 3 nights. During this time, Lam's known activity was very limited. She changed from a share room to a single. She visited a bookstore and returned to the hotel. Shortly after, she vanished. Her last sighting was on a security footage from one of the hotel's elevators, as she's seen acting erratically like she's hiding from someone or something. Lam started making strange hand movements, possibly to alert whoever might be watching the security camera. These were her last moments before her body was discovered in the hotel's water tank. To this day, it remains a mystery in how she got into the water tank and what made her do it. This is how you spot a psychopath before they kill you. In 1995, Catherine Knight was a 40-year-old woman who grew up in New South Wales, Australia. Catherine grew up in a cruel, abusive household, which motivated her to try and build a family of her own. She had many failed relationships until one day she met a man named John Price. That year, Catherine moved in with John and his 3 young daughters, who got along with Catherine very quickly. One night, they got into a heated fight about marriage, where she grabbed a nearby knife and slashed John in the chest. He yelled at her to get out of the house as she stormed off. On the following night, John comes home from work and can't find his kids anywhere, but finds a note from Catherine. In the note, she explains where the kids are and how she wants to make up with them, so she would be back in a little while. John was not happy about this, so he waited for her in the living room. John waited until 11 p.m., then he decided to go to sleep. An hour goes by and Catherine walks in with lingerie. They start getting intimate with each other and fall asleep together. Catherine wakes up in the middle of the night and has a sudden sense of disgust. She thought John had taken advantage of her, so she would teach him a lesson. She got on top of John and stabbed him in the chest. John, in adrenaline, pushed her off of him and ran. He quickly bled out and fell on the kitchen floor. She proceeded to make different dishes with his body and planned to feed the kids her father. When she realized what she had done, she tried overdosing on sleeping pills. Thanks to John's co-workers who were worried for him and contacted the police, they were able to make it to the scene and save Catherine. Catherine will be the first person in Arizona history to be sent to life in prison with no parole. You would not believe this story if it wasn't for this video. In September of 2018, a young woman named Sandra Gonzalez left to work at around 10 p.m. Her boyfriend, Anthony Castillo, was to take care of her 2-year-old baby, Fabiola Rodriguez, for the night. Anthony physically abused Fabiola until she stopped breathing. He would go on to call 911 hours later at 3:19 a.m. Fabiola would unfortunately pass away and be buried in Masonic Cemetery in Las Cruces. Sandra suspected that her ex-boyfriend Anthony was vandalizing Fabiola's grave, so the family set up hidden cameras to see who was responsible. What they captured will shock you. In the footage, a little girl can be seen walking along the side of a tall man. Sandra believes that the tall man and her daughter were crossing over onto the other side. This is why you may get a call from the afterlife. In 2010, a husband died, leaving the wife alone in the house. A couple of days later, the woman began calling 911 for basic mundane tasks. The dispatchers were respectful of her since she was showing clear signs of dementia. They tell the woman, "You cannot call unless it's an emergency." She eventually understands, apologizes, and hangs up. Shortly, the woman called. Thinking it was her deceased husband, she asked, "John, where are you?" 911 would tell her respectfully not to call unless it's an emergency and to call her family. She called again in distress, asking John to please help me. This time they would send first responders out to her house. They found a woman upstairs and she had recently passed away, but the calls continued. She would continue to call for help multiple times a week, and each call she did had a unique conversation. Police began contacting the phone companies, checking her house, anything they can think of to try to figure out who is making these calls. The house was broken into and burnt down, yet the calls continued for well over a year they did, until one day it suddenly stopped. Stop leaving your doors unlocked. This is why. On June 10th, 1912, Josiah Moore, Sarah Moore, and their children were fast asleep upstairs. They lived in a small town in Villisca, Iowa, which was considered a safe and friendly town, so they left their front door open. At midnight, a mysterious man entered through the unlocked door and he was holding a lamp and an axe. The man made his way up the stairs, crept past the room with the children, and into Mr. and Mrs. Moore's bedroom. The man took the keys to the house and left, locking the door behind him. On the next morning, the house was unusually quiet, so the neighbors alerted Joe's brother, who arrived to have a look. What he saw after letting himself in with his own key was straight out of a nightmare. Everyone in the house was dead. All 8 of them were bludgeoned beyond recognition. In 2014, a paranormal investigator stabbed himself after spending one night in that house. Tours to the house have been cut short by children's voices and flying objects. Today, their home is considered one of the most haunted houses in the country. This 17-year-old was a World War II hero. In 1943, Lipa Radek volunteered to retrieve wounded comrades from the battlefield. Joining her battling comrades, she would be captured by Nazi forces. After 3 days of torturing Lipa, she would not give up information. Nazis were frustrated and sent her to death by hanging. She was marched down to a gallows in public view where she would be hanged. A Nazi commander gave her one more chance to give up information of her partisan comrades. She passionately responded, "I am not a traitor of my people. Those whom you're asking about will reveal themselves when they have succeeded in wiping out all you evildoers, to the last man." Here's a photo of Lipa after she told the Nazi commander her comrades were going to kill him. This haunted mind will keep you awake at night. In 2013, a middle-aged man named Frank went to a small town in Nevada called Kingston. After 300 videos of mine exploration, the Horton mine in Kingston would be the one to take a dark turn. Here's what happened.
I'll go a few feet further in and check it out, but I think I'm going to pass on this one. Here's a shot looking back towards the entrance. I'm a little bit further in. I don't know why that one chain is swinging back there. Don't know if you can see that in the video or not.
After this video, Frank would never return to the Horton mine again. Frank has stated he has no reason to fake this video. What do you think? This 10-year-old girl killed a 6-month-old baby while he was at daycare. In 2018, a man named Nate dropped off his 6-month-old son Jackson at daycare. Amber, the daycare owner, had a 10-year-old foster daughter whose name is not known. One day at 3 p.m., Amber's daughter had arrived from school and was advised to play outside with the other foster kids, yet she disobeyed and stayed inside. She saw Jackson napping and felt an urge to hold him. She picked up Jackson and accidentally dropped him. Initially, Jackson was okay, just very upset and crying. The girl was worried she would get in trouble, so she panicked and started stomping on Jackson's head multiple times. Jackson was rushed to the ER, but unfortunately, he would later pass away in the hospital. Jackson's father, Nate, took her to court where she would be judged as an adult. The girl was later sent to a mental institution. This is why you don't talk to strangers. In the early 70s, a college student hitchhiked his way home after morning class. A man pulls up to offer him a ride and he accepts. After telling him where he's going, the man drives past his destination. He asked him to turn the car around and the man declined. When the car slowed down, he jumped off and ran. A couple of years later at a cafe, he saw on TV the man who picked him up that day. His name was John Wayne Gacy, a captured serial killer who had later removed all his passenger door handles from his car. This is why you don't go to the woods at night. In 2017, a disturbing YouTube video was surfaced. A police officer in Saudi Arabia encountered what looks like an old lady in white. You can see the police officer scream in fear as she approaches him. At the end, the police officer drives away from the old lady. The video doesn't have much detail for this bizarre event other than describing the old lady as a witch. This history teacher manipulated his students and created a high school loyal army. In 1967, a California history teacher, Ron Jones, wanted to explain his class how the German population could have accepted the actions of the Nazi regime. Jones conducted a series of exercises in his classroom emphasizing discipline and community. This was intended to model certain characteristics of the Nazi movement. The students grew loyal to Jones and began recruiting hundreds of different students from other schools. They even had a security division consisting of high schoolers with personal bodyguards to protect Jones in the school. Jones would begin to feel that the experiment had spiraled out of control, so he told the students to rally for a special announcement where the movement would go nationwide. The day of the rally, he would disappoint them with the truth that this was nothing but an experiment as he showed them a short film of Nazi Germany. This 15-year-old girl caught herself on fire after reading the newspaper. In 2018, a 15-year-old girl, Andrea Gomez, decided to play Ouija after watching it in a movie. She felt a cold presence behind her and thought it was just her imagination. On the following night, she began to have nightmares. She saw herself participating in cults of human sacrifices. Each passing day, the nightmares would intensify and she would be close to making her own sacrifice. On the 8th night, Andrea had a nightmare where she would be the one to sacrifice a newborn child. Andrea had a knife and she was told to stab the newborn in the chest, but she would not let herself do it. Suddenly, she feels a cold presence and hands forcing her to bury the knife in the child's chest. In the morning, she read the newspaper and ran to the nearest gas station where she would set herself on fire. The newspaper describes a crime where a baby was stabbed to death. Andrea realized that baby belonged to Maria, her best friend. If you see this while swimming, get out of the water fast. Here's why. In 2013, a 20-year-old man named Jacob Cockle was known as the Whirlpool Hitman. He loved swimming nearby whirlpools and recorded himself with a horse mask. One day, Jacob was swimming in a whirlpool nearby a Cornwall harbor, where he decided to submerge himself just underneath the whirlpool so he can get a good shot of it, and this is where he would unfortunately record his own death. This is the footage Jacob recorded below the whirlpool, knowing he was going to drown. Australia had an all-out war with the emus and lost. Here's what happened. In 1932, World War I retired veterans were given land by the Australian government. Over 20,000 emus migrated to Western Australia where they would consume and spoil the crops. The veterans pleaded to the government to take action in reducing the population of the emu. In October, they would lead an attack on the emus with a war major, a sergeant, and 1,000 rounds of ammunition. They called off the attack because it was raining outside. On November 2nd, they ambushed the emus, but the emus split into smaller groups led by a larger alpha emu and escaped. There were only a dozen birds killed. One suicidal emu ran into an armored vehicle's steering wheel, jamming it and causing them to crash. On the second attempt, they tried ambushing 1,000 emus in a local dam, but the machine gun jammed shortly after firing, killing just a handful of emus. The emus took 14 shots to kill, forcing the Australians to surrender to the emus. The emus would win the war, but only due to a lack of ammunition. Creepy Unexplained Sounds Part 2. In the late afternoon, a couple's truck broke down while it was towing a boat out a nearby lake. After no success in starting the vehicle, it was getting late, so the couple decided they would spend the night on the side of the road. In complete darkness, the man was awoken by the horrifying sounds of an unknown creature, and they could tell these sounds were coming from deep inside the woods. The man was worried nobody would believe him, so he recorded the event. Take a look.
Sounds closer to me.
This couple actually had a monster underneath their bed. In 2014, a couple returned home and found their room was trashed beyond belief. There was lotion on all the door handles. All their shoes had their inner soles ripped off, and there was a bucket of paint dumped on top of their toilet. They called the police, but the police could not find any evidence of a break-in, so the couple began thinking it was something paranormal. Moments later, the couple would call the police again, after hearing what sounded like a dying animal underneath their bed. What the police found underneath that bed is nightmare fuel. Coming from underneath the bed was a lanky lady high on meth holding a syringe and a kitchen knife. The police later determined she climbed a nearby tree and got in through the window. The officer tells them the lady had been scraping underneath the mattress trying to get to you. After this event, they would get a new mattress. Creepy Unexplained Sounds, Part 1. A group of hunters went hiking for the day, but it started to get dark, so they would decide to set camp for the night. They were traveling through a place called Sierra Camp, where most experienced hunters could share their stories of unexplained events. Later that night, the hunters would hear a strange animal cry. It was something like they had never heard before. One of the hunters, Ron Moorhead, reported the event where these two creatures seemed like they were communicating with each other, just nearby their campsite. When he mimicked the cries, the sounds that come after would terrify the group.
There's two of them across the creek at the big rocks.
Creepy Unexplained Sounds, Part 3. In 1960, a 16-year-old girl, Annalise Michelle, grew up in a Catholic household where she would also attend Mass twice a week. One day at school, she suddenly blacked out and began walking around dazed. Though Annalise did not remember the event, her friends and family did tell her she was in a trance-like state. After the second time, she would visit a neurologist, who diagnosed her with temporal lobe epilepsy. However, the drug she was given failed to help her, and as the year progressed, her condition began to deteriorate. Annalise began to believe that she was possessed by a demon and that she needed to find a solution outside of medicine. The audio recordings were made public and they are nothing short from horrifying. Take a look.
Det tænkte mig ereignis så hendes der ikke forsvinde. Der var vi med vagten, men
In 2016, a man named Frank went to explore an abandoned gold mine in Western Australia. When he arrived, Frank noticed the mine was in a dangerous state with most of its foundation broken down. But since Frank had traveled so many hours to get to this mine, he decided that he would explore it anyways. Deep inside the mine, Frank walked a long stretched tunnel. This is where he would hear a conjunction of demonic voices warning him to return, or even possibly daring him to go further in.
Do you hear that? It stopped. Well, I don't know what that is. That doesn't sound like wind, but that's crazy. Don't know if that's a bird or I don't know what that is. It almost sounds like snakes, but wow.
This girl is obsessed with convincing her boyfriends to kill themselves. In 2012, two young teenagers, Michelle Carter and Conrad Roy, met while they had been visiting relatives in Florida. Roy had been physically abused by his father and suffered from depression. Michelle was supportive of this until 2014, where she suddenly began encouraging him to just kill himself. They even made a plan on how he would commit suicide. Roy would begin expressing his doubts on killing himself, but Michelle manipulated him, making him think that he and his family want this, and that they would eventually come to understand his decision. That night, Roy dropped off his sisters from getting ice cream, then he would drive to a nearby Kmart parking lot. He would use a portable generator with a hose attached to his truck to fill his vehicle with carbon monoxide. Michelle texted Roy telling him that she wanted him to text her until the very last moment. Roy, regretting his decision, exited the vehicle, but Michelle would convince him to get back in, and this is where he would die of carbon monoxide poisoning. For this crime, Michelle only spent 11 months in jail with 5 years of probation and was released early due to good behavior. If you scare easily, swipe on. An unknown publisher uploaded a video at 3 a.m. of this young girl getting her hair touched by something or someone hiding inside of the drawer. As this person gets closer, whatever was touching her hair hides back in the drawer and completely disappears. The girl seems to be unresponsive, in a trance-like state, as the person recording attempts to wake her up. The only thing you can see inside the drawer is a small stuffed doll, but nothing like the human hands has seen before. You wouldn't believe me if it wasn't for this video. It's September 14th of 2003, the Wingate Hotel, located in Illinois, reported a paranormal event. The hotel received several noise complaints coming from the second floor, specifically room 209. The manager checked the in-house list, but nobody was registered in room 209. So he would send security up to the room while he watched in the surveillance cameras. As soon as John, the security guy, arrived at 209's door, you could immediately tell there's a woman screaming coming from inside that room. John knocks on the door, but the screaming continues. As soon as John opens the door, you can see a white figure exiting the room. While the screaming did stop, the room was found in baffling conditions. The carpet had been ripped, all the furniture had been flipped upside down, and for some reason, the shower was left running.
John's gonna enter the room real quick just to check, make sure, see what's going on. Wait one. John? John, are you there? Okay, Amy, John wants you to call the police right now if you don't mind.
This family accidentally bought a haunted doll. On Christmas of 2013, a Houston area girl was gifted an Elsa doll, and all was well until it wasn't. The doll recited phrases from the movie Frozen and sang Let It Go whenever you pressed a little button on its necklace. After 2 years, the doll began changing languages randomly. Although a little creepy, the family thought it was a glitch. Even when the doll was switched off, it would still sing on its own. Things started to move around the house by themselves, TVs turning off and on and lights flickering. And it all started with the doll, so they would dispose of it. But every time they did, she would eventually return in random areas of the house. So the family decided they would mail that doll to a friend in Minnesota, but without a return address. The doll had arrived to their friend, and he was well aware of the history this doll had, so he would decide to strap the doll onto the brush guard of his Jeep. The doll no longer sings on its own, but even without the doll, strange things continue to happen in that family's house. This man felt like eating someone, so he posted an online ad. In 2001, a man named Armin wanted to butcher and eat a young, well-built man, so he posted an ad looking for one. Another man by the name of Bernard Brandes posted an ad looking for someone interested in butchering and eating him. Being a perfect match, they both talked and agreed to meet. Armin wanted to do it for cannibalism, while Bernard wanted to get to know him first before he let someone eat him. They went to Armin's bathroom, where Bernard would take 20 sleeping pills and have his male parts chopped off. Armin would record the whole thing, mostly to show that Bernard consented to this. Armin would fry coke and eat Bernard's male part with him. They both thought it was overdone, so they fed it to the dog. Soon after, Armin would kiss Bernard and stab him in the neck with a kitchen knife. He would proceed to butcher and consume Bernard. In a 10-month period, he would consume 44 pounds of Bernard before the police knocked on his door. You won't be able to listen to this without going crazy. This is the Shepherd tone. It's really weird. It can cause panic and anxiety attacks. So if you suffer from these, you should mute the video. The Shepherd tone is a strange audio trick. It sounds like it's forever ascending or descending, but it actually never gets higher or lower. This is due to the notes being played an octave apart, so it sounds similar in the human ear, but it's actually just a loop. You won't be able to listen to this without going crazy. This is the Shepherd tone. It's really weird. It can cause panic and anxiety attacks. So if you suffer from these, you should mute the video. The Shepherd tone is a strange audio trick. It sounds like it's forever ascending or descending, but it actually never gets higher or lower. This is due to the notes being played an octave apart, so it sounds similar in the human ear, but it's actually just a loop.